Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome to a video about the PTE, which is hopefully going to be super duper helpful to you and help you improve your game style and appreciate the game a bit more. So the PTE, which is the public test environment, used to be private for a couple of months but was released to the public on the 22nd of April, so approximately a week ago as of the time of recording. And honestly, I think everybody has been really glad that this has happened. I mean, people have been asking for an update for a really long time, and it is finally here. However, this has also been a bit divisive because some people really love the PT, and I myself am part of that camp, and some people really hate it. And I think people hate it for a select few reasons, which I'm going to go over with you today to help you improve. So, without further ado, let's get into it. So why do you suck at Broken Arrow 2.0 / the PTE? Well, I think first and foremost, you got to realize that sometimes it isn't you, it is the game. I know that sounds a bit like a breakup, but that's not the intention. That is the actual truth. Updates always have a period of turbulence, and I think they always take a while for the status quo, the balance, to iron itself out. I mean, think about the previous update, which flipped the Russia and America win rates by a good 180 degrees. It takes a while for updates to kick in, for people to get used to them, for people to adjust their tactics and play styles to get used to them, and after which I think the balance will sort of, show itself. A week is really not long enough to judge how imbalanced or whatever the game is. I think everybody's just in a big learning period. So whilst we're in a big learning period, I'm here to try and help you. For example, with the changes as well, by the way, overkill. I think most people just wanted overkill to basically work. So when there's an aircraft flying directly above your AA and your AA is not firing, that would have been fine if it just fired. But obviously they've done a massive sledgehammer to that issue, and they've reworked the whole system, which is why, again, there's just a big shock and adjustment that needs to take place in the next couple of weeks. Also, think about this. ELO has been zeroed for all players. So whenever you jump into a multiplayer match, you're now playing against potentially, some of the newest and worst players of BA, but more often than not, probably players that are better than you. Let's be honest. I mean, you're going to be looking at players that on the main vanilla-based game, they could be in ELOs of 3,000, 2,000, 1,000. There's no way of knowing because, again, on the PTE, everybody's mixed into the same pile. So, again, sometimes it really isn't your fault when you just get, you're doing respectably on the base branch, you're quite a good player, but hey, you get put up against one of the world's top 100 players, and yeah, you're going to lose, which is going to make you hate the game more, but ultimately, you got to remember that not everything is your fault. That is a PTE specific problem, and that is potentially one of the reasons that you think that you suck at the game and hate PTE, but actually it is just one of those things that you can't do much about. Is similarly, you might get some really awful teammates, which, really does ruin your enjoyment of the game. So to help with that, I do recommend joining my Discord and playing with like-minded and similar level kind of people. And of course, that means that there's a lot of new mechanics and features, so you can't exactly play like you used to, and that's a big problem because you can't go into a new game, which is what 2.0 kind of is, apart from it's still got all the base Broken Arrow problems, but hey, they'll get fixed eventually. But you can't go into a brand new game and play exactly the same way that you used to play. That is not going to be very successful. So you really do have to adapt or die. You really do have to change up your tactics and adjust to the new mechanisms and just embrace them. But I'm going to help you do that. So part of that system leads me nicely onto my next point, which is the decks. So again, you can't use and abuse them like you used to. You must have a purpose-built PTE deck. And again, feel free to copy mine on Discord. I make videos about deck building, and I think I've already identified two of the strongest decks for America and Russia on the PTE. I also really highly recommend, especially when I do my 1-to-1 lessons as well for newer players, which again, you're all new players in the PTE, to just stick to one deck. Remember when you first started playing this game and you were just overwhelmed by the sheer amount of units, their capabilities and all the choices that you have, especially with the enemy side as well, how to deal with it. It's all very, you feel like a rabbit in the headlights. And essentially, the best way to help yourself improve and stay consistent is just to stick to one deck for each country, just for the time being. And obviously, as you get more experience and more used to and more appreciative of the mechanics of the PTE, then you can switch over to, trying experimenting with other types of units. But yeah, just stick to one deck and consistently improve what you're doing before moving on. What's next? Alright, so the air. Yeah, there's obviously a huge rework, and ultimately you can't get away with doing exactly what you could do before. Airstrikes, you're looking at a high probability of getting shot down, which was America's greatest strength before the PTE. American planes could more or less bomb with impunity, which was their strength, of course. It was a good advantage, and that has been more or less, I wouldn't say taken away, it's just become a lot harder to do and a lot harder to cash in effectively. So how do we mitigate that, and how do we improve our airstrikes and make air power really, really useful? I think one tip is to keep your air power as cheap as possible, because ultimately you are talking about a high risk of it getting shot down, so try to feed the enemy a few less points. For example, the A10 with just the gun is actually a very, very, very attractive option. Works great. Teamwork is also super essential. So for example, Seed is effective, it still does work. The enemy can't just have its radar on at all times. It is easier to shoot down Seed missiles, but ultimately if you get 4 Prowlers or F-16s with CJs coming out at you, you are going to take quite a few casualties with your AA network. So the purpose of that is that you need to coordinate with your team to get them all to bring out their Seed at the same time. And again, this only really works when you're in comms with your team, so once again, join my Discord. And then the second thing is, there are still super expensive aircraft like the Sex Eagle, but obviously it's not as effective anymore because it's really, really expensive. So what's the solution? Only go for super duper high value targets with your aircraft that you know you're going to cash in well on. Don't always look for just a point for point trade. So for example, an F-35 is 400 points and an Armata is 400 points. So that is at least a fair trade. But also remember that, taking the Armata off the battlefield is way, way more important. Don't waste your aircraft on super duper cheap strikes that, don't really have much effect on the battlefield like perhaps you used to. Next up is the mighty tank. So the tank is now king of the battlefield. Yes, it is, but that doesn't mean to say that you can just roam around freely with your tanks and expect to win. It is still fragile, or more accurately susceptible to javelins and helicopters. They are still very powerful counters, even though obviously, Shorad exists and might shoot your helicopters down. Again, removing a tank from the battlefield is essential because not only does that give you freedom to maneuver, it means that if you've deleted their tanks and your tanks are still alive, you're going to be in for a very good time dealing with all the enemy infantry and the supporting stuff that they have. So once you break through, you're going to be in for a very good time. So yeah, tanks are very powerful, but you still have to baby them. You still have to really look after them and make sure your micro is on point. So as soon as they take one hit from another tank, which removes about 80% of their health or so, make sure to smoke out, go back, recycle it, repair it, and that way you're going to get a lot more use out of the points that you have. It's also a really good idea to use super cheap tanks like the M8 and the Spruts. They're very effective, especially for their price. And also, don't expect to, again, tanks are tanky, but they're still very vulnerable to RPGs. If you drive through a city with a tank with no infantry, yeah, you're gonna lose it. People realize that the tank is super powerful, but they think it's also like bulletproof, which it really isn't. Remember, tanks are super powerful for both teams. So yeah, always use them in a pair as well. That's a really good tip, because 2 shots to kill a tank, boom, you've got it before it's even returned fire. Next up is early game openers. Now this is where I've seen the biggest difference by far. So nowadays early openers can have a much more serious effect on the rest of the game. So What happens is airstrikes, which by the way aren't as effective towards the end game, where again the enemy has got a lot more AA, but in the early game you can absolutely hammer the enemy's opener. And I think this has a quite devastating effect on your morale too, because if you lose your opener, you're like, shit, you have to completely restart and rebuild. Now, here's the thing, you now do have a relatively higher income, because the first 1,000 points of income are tax-free, as in income tax-free. So, this gives you a lot more points to open with, and I think again people are eager to rush in with their stuff, but you got to remember that this game is about patience, about slow build up, and if you have your supporting stuff in place before rushing into the objective, you're going to be in for a much better time, not only shooting down enemy aircraft, etc., but also defeating the tanks and stuff that might be rushing your way. So remember that a patient and slower build up, especially with good recon, is a much more important thing to do than to rush and cap the objective first. Have all your units ready and at least float enough points for a fighter if you're not going to go for the AA. Now I do want to say that all these things are really important, but it is all going to take time to learn. So don't worry. Again, back to the first point. Why do you suck at 2.0? Well, sometimes it really isn't your fault. I do like the vanilla version just because obviously, you know, elos and stuff are established and you're playing against like-minded opponents similar to your level. So what I want to quickly show you is some statistics, and essentially these are the things and surveys that I do for, you know, the channel, but also for the game. So here we go at the PTE. There's 72 comments here. Here's a poll that we're asking whether APCs should actually revive squad members. Now I'm firmly in the no camp, but hey, this is a democracy, you know. But this is all stuff that I'm going to feed back to the devs. So if you haven't already, subscribe, and then these will show up on your feed, and you can get your say and help shape the future of BA, which I think is really important. Most people seem to love the game, 8 or 9 out of 10. With only a very 10% saying it's worse than a 5. I think a lot of the people, from judging my comments, say 6 or 7 just because of the huge issues with the game itself. But again, that's a broken arrow, not a PTE issue. Here we go, we see the spikes in recent times and actually quite a healthy amount of players, 6,000 on 24-hour peak. By the way, bear in mind that this is just for the vanilla. When you look at the PTE as well, that's going to have a different number as well. So there's about 3,000 on vanilla, sorry, 5,000 on vanilla and another 3,000 on PTE. So yeah, the numbers are really growing, which is really lovely to see. Much more interest in the game. I hope it does well. I hope they finally polish some of the things that are still problematic in the game. And I hope by the end of the testing environment, we're going to get a much more solid 2.0, which is going to be much better for all to use. But hey, remember these tips, and I hope you implement them to make yourself a better player on the PT and hate it a bit less. Thank you so much for watching. Like, comment, and subscribe, all the usual. Love you lots. See you later. Bye-bye.